Good evening and welcome to our Catalyst collaborations. My name is Klaudia Tomkowiak. I'm the University Events Manager. Thank you for joining us. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We're not expecting any fire alarms, so if there is a fire alarm, please leave the premises calmly. There's a fire exit to my right, one behind you, and to my left. And the assembly point is just outside of the building at the car park 2. If I can just please ask that your phones are switched on silent or vibrate. I'm just going to leave you a minute because I can see people having a... And we have some strugglers. Thank you very much for joining us. This is our last Catalyst collaboration in our spring series. And we're absolutely delighted to have Dr. Sarah Rose and Dr. Richard Jolley to deliver this talk for us, which is very, very interesting, and they will tell you all about it. To our online viewers, if you do have a question, please put them in the chat, and we will have question and answer sessions at the end of the talk. So without further ado, Richard and Sarah.
Welcome, everyone. We're both very appreciative of this opportunity to share our research with you. So I'm Dr. Richard Jolley. I'm an Associate Professor of Developmental Psychology in the Psychology Department, and my colleague...
Hello, I'm Dr. Sarah Rose, and I'm a Senior Lecturer in Psychology and Child Development here at Staffs. And we've come tonight to talk about a project that we did with two of our colleagues in the Psychology Department as well. Dr. Claire Barlow, who's here, thank you, Claire, and Romina, who I think might be watching online, Dr. Romina Vivaldi. So it's been really great to work with these colleagues for this project. So, shall I set
Sarah's
off?
going to start, and then I'll come in later.
And I'll hand back to Richard. Okay, so coronavirus. March 2020, lots of uncertainty, changes in our lives, changes in children's lives. As developmental psychologists, we were really interested in what children's experiences of these difficult, challenging, uncertain times were. And so we quite quickly wanted to look at what was already known, but also what we could add to this. So we already know a little bit about children's experiences of the pandemic. Colleagues in psychology looked at statistics and evidence and research that was already available about the impact of lockdowns on children's activity. And unsurprisingly, children's physical activity levels reduced generally during the periods of lockdowns, and their sedentary behaviours, screen time, online learning, etc. increased. We know also a little bit about the sort of mental health impacts that this time had on children. NHS reports that there was increased instances of children feeling lonely, children experiencing poor sleep, decreases in children's mental well-being, and really worryingly that children were also less likely to seek help for this poor mental well-being. There is some evidence that for some children there were maybe some positive changes, particularly around things to do with spending more time with their family. But we were really interested in the children's experiences and in their voice in particular. And this is where we were able to use our expertise and work with our colleagues to use children's drawings to gain some insight into their experience from their perspective. So children generally enjoy drawing pictures. Particularly young children start mark making usually before the age of 2, and usually drawing is an activity that they continue to enjoy through childhood and into adolescence. We know from previous research that children do express feelings and emotions through drawings, and indeed drawing has already been used to study children's experiences of their illness, of their own illness. So researchers have looked at children who are undergoing cancer treatment, and children's drawings there depict their experiences both of the symptoms, of the experience of having cancer, and also of their experiences of the treatment. Other researchers have looked at children's drawings in terms of their understanding of the common cold virus, and children's drawings there have shown that they can depict both things about the virus transmission, and also what it feels like to have a cold. Not very nice. We also have got evidence that children's drawings have been used in the past to look at times of change and uncertainty for children, such as when there's political unrest or war, that children's drawings have been used there. So we already, prior to COVID, had a precedent there set of using children's drawings to really gain an insight into their experiences without having to rely always on that ability to verbally express and understand and be able to report back what their feelings were. So research takes quite a long time. So we began planning our study very much at the beginning of the COVID periods when the lockdowns were just introduced, etc. And clearly other researchers in other parts of the world were doing the same thing at the same time. So we do already know a little bit more broadly of children's experiences through drawings of the coronavirus experiences. Within this research, researchers as they do have taken slightly different approaches. So there's quite a number of studies which have really looked at children's understanding of the virus. And children have demonstrated quite good understanding of the virus and have been able to depict what the virus looks like quite accurately. In terms of their more sort of psychological and social experiences, the views here that have been expressed by children in their drawings are often ones that are really quite negative. Feelings of fear, anxiety, of their social circle being made very small, of not being able to go outside the house and have freedoms and meet up with friends. There's only been one UK study that's been published so far about which used children's drawings that were collected during these lockdown periods, and it was a very small scale study. They just had 18 children that took part in this study, and they interviewed the children and they had the children drawing pictures. And again, this study found very negative themes. They found three themes really about that were coming out of the children's drawings and what they said about their experiences during the coronavirus lockdown periods. And what they found is that, yes, children had some quite good understanding of the virus, of virus transmission. That was one theme. Another theme was all around their kind of fear and anxiety, fear of that unknown, the uncertainty. I think many of us can reflect back and identify with that. And then the third theme was about social relationships and how these had changed as a result of the lockdowns and how they weren't able to meet friends in person, but they were trying to find other ways to meet up with friends, such as on Zoom calls, etc. So we already knew a little bit, and this knowledge is still very much being shared at this time. And what really motivated myself, Richard, and our colleagues is, okay, we're getting some understanding here, but what themes, what are the children in the UK drawing about their experiences? And we're not just wanting to know about their experiences of, their understanding of the virus. We wanted to know very broadly about their experiences of how this was impacting their lives. And we're very aware that not all children will have had the same experiences. So right from the outset, we recognise that children of different ages, particularly maybe children who may have had parents who were key workers still going out to work, compared to those who had parents who were not key workers, who may have therefore been working from home or in the home more. So we were very interested in looking at whether the themes in children's drawings might differ depending on the child's age, the child's gender, and the key worker status of their parents. So, in order to answer these research questions, we needed children. Now, we're in lockdown. Normally we'd go to schools and collect children's drawings that way, but instead we used every means we could think of. We contacted schools and we asked them to share details of our research that we were doing with parents through the communications they were still having. We contacted local charities. We contacted as many people as we could think of, really, who had connections with children, and to ask them to help us promote this study. So the study was conducted wholly online. We had a bespoke website created where parents could read about the study. There was a small video so their children could be told about the study. We could gain their consent to take part. We could ask them some sort of background demographic questions about the family, about the child. And really importantly, we then had a little video which explained to the children that we wanted them to draw a picture of their experiences since the coronavirus pandemic had arrived in the UK. Parents then took a photograph and they uploaded the photograph to the website of the photograph of the picture so that we could access it that way. And we did enter parents into a prize draw so that there was some incentive for them taking part. So through this means, we gathered data from 68 children and their parents. Some children did have siblings who took part in the study as well. We were interested in quite a broad age range, so children from the ages of 4 to 14. The average age of children taking part was 8.5. You can see that we did have almost twice as many female children take part compared to male children. We did have the option for them to have a non-binary gender, but none of them chose that. In terms of key worker, approximately half of our children had at least one parent who was a key worker. We collected this data during those 2 periods where the restrictions were at their greatest, where we were in lockdown. That relatively early coronavirus period took a little bit of time to get ethics approval, etc. So we began collecting in that early June of May 2020, and we kept collecting sort of until July or August time, when things started to kind of go back to a little bit of normality and schools were back in September. We then paused data collection, and then that second lockdown period that happened early in the spring of 2021, we recruited some more participants then. I mentioned that we asked for some background details about the children who took part, and this did include a question about the extent to which the virus had impacted their family. And children did talk about coronavirus, or they reported to us that coronavirus had made them feel sad. They weren't very happy about it, but generally the impact on their family, as reported by the parents, was relatively low. And this is maybe not surprising. These were children whose families had the time, the resources, the mental energy to take part in our research. So I'm going to hand over to Richard now, who's going to tell you a little bit about what we did with the drawings once we got them, and what we found.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Now, I joined the point in the talk, which is actually the driest part of the talk, because it's the methodology. It's fallen upon me. I don't quite know how that happened. So it's quite intense, this methodology, the process we did to score the drawings. But bear with me, I'll get you through it, and then we can later on look at some drawings and all cheer up a bit. Okay, so in order to establish the most common messages that the children were speaking through their pictorial voice to us, we use something called content analysis, which originated in its traditional approach of analysing conversations or written text, basically language. Now, in this traditional form, words, phrases and sentences are analysed to put within themes or categories of which the participants, whether they're speaking or writing, are communicating their main messages. Well, we adapted content analysis to generate themes from children's pictures, and that was done through 2 phases. In the first phase, you had to generate the themes in the first place, okay? So we had 2 independent raters who first listed literally every single item of content across all the 68 drawings. And when I say independently, they did that on their own. And then they came together and discussed their list and to agree any discrepancies. We then separated them and said, okay, you've got your agreed list, now put them into categories, or the term is themes. So think about all the content you've got here, which sort of categories do the content seem to go in? And then they would come together, discuss and agree a final list of themes. Now they were then given those themes to 2 new raters, so these actually scored the drawings. So as I will show shortly, there were 17 different themes, 17 different types of messages that the children were communicating. But of course, we then needed to see, well, which ones are in which drawings, because we need to firstly see how common each of the themes. So they would then score the drawings, and should I say they, at this point, if the child wrote an additional script, a narrative about the drawing, they could do, they weren't forced to, they had a choice, they had that information as well. And the reason why we included that, because we didn't want to disadvantage younger drawers or less skilled drawers, because we simply couldn't work out what they've drawn. So the written text, if they chose, was sometimes helpful to do that. So they then scored independently those drawings, and they came together to discuss and come to an agreement with any discrepancies. And I basically oversaw and trained and oversaw both of those processes to make sure everything was being done consistently and reliably. Okay, well, I think you look as though you've survived that, so well done. And let's actually have a look at some of the themes. So these were 17 of them. I won't unpack every one. Hopefully, most of them are reasonably self-explanatory, but I will unpack the sort of the major ones, which were consistently, frequently coming through. So feelings and emotions, these were mostly literal, sort of facial expressions, but sometimes they occurred through personification, such as the sun having a face, or even a COVID cell, and I think we might see 1 or 2 of those coming in the drawings later. A lot of the drawings had people in, as you might appreciate. One theme was people being shown on their own. Now, that might be drawings that literally there was just one person, but sometimes we had drawings which clearly one person was placed on their own in isolation, whereas there might be someone else elsewhere in the drawing, but they weren't presented as a group. Now, of course, there were other drawings which did present a group, perhaps a household or a social bubble, but sometimes they were shown as groups as an indication where the child's saying, I can't see these people anymore, okay? And they would actually put a cross or some clear denotation to express that. Then moving on to furniture and buildings, you might not think that was very interesting, but of course it showed what environments they were living in. So there was a lot of household items, but also schools, hospitals, shops, and so on. So the children really spoke, where they were living through this pandemic. Nature, so that's weather-related themes, vegetation and animals. Now, prohibited and restricted behaviour. So this includes banned activities, but also activities you could do, but under restricted circumstances. So banned activities, we would often see a cross or some sort of prohibition sign, you can't do that, or they would simply write it, can't do it. So not being able to go to school or go on holidays, see people outside your house or bubble. Restricted behaviour would be like a stay-at-home sign, if you can remember that in the first lockdown, or 2-metre social distancing sign. Then another theme was personal virus protection behaviour. So this is the sort of things we all did to protect ourselves and to protect other people. So hand sanitizer, that's as if you could get hold of it. early on. Gloves, masks, even PPE, washing hands, self-isolating, or even the vaccine, as there was, well, that did come in by the time of the second phase of our data collection, but there was certainly talk about it, wasn't there? Then virus contamination and transmission. Well, this is the virus itself. So children, yes, they drew the virus. There are some pictures coming up shortly, and also being transmitted to people. More positively, activities engaged during the pandemic, because they could do some things. So some of it was more home-based, so we'll see some examples of homeschooling, virtual video communications. You know, we all got plagued with Zoom, didn't we? Family time, household activities, but also activities in the garden and generally outside. So these were the main themes. That there are others there. Hopefully they're reasonably self-explanatory, but please do ask if you need any further clarification. Now, to really explain it, it's best to use an example of how they were scored. So this is one of the drawings, and what you'll see here in yellow, these were the themes in which the raters agreed were in this drawing. So this was quite a busy drawing. On average, there was about 5 themes. And what's in white are the particular content items that went with that theme. So I won't go through them all, but I'm sure I'll perhaps pick out one or two. So feelings and emotions. This wasn't necessarily very strong on this theme, but we do have it here with I hate online PE. Yeah. I mean, I hate PE. It doesn't matter whether it's online or not, but obviously it was just online for this child. Loads of prohibited and restricted behaviours. I mean, there was quite a few drawings where the children wrote what they wanted to really communicate. It's almost they're emphasising, please don't miss this. And they put the written test. I'm missing school, church for this child, family relations, friends, going to the park, and so on and so on. We can see very inventive, creative use of the COVID cell to replace the O in COVID. And we can see two people. See, this is an example where there's 2 pictures, 2 people, but it was coded not as a group, because you can see they're not a group, are they? They're separated out. And of course, separation was a big theme through the pandemic. So they're just some examples. Of course, you know, with the virus protection behaviour, you can see masks. There's a couple, one there, hand sanitizer, and stay safe signs. So that, hopefully that gives you, so there were 17 themes, but each drawing got scored for which themes it was showing, and that's what this drawing got scored at. But the others were done in a similar way. Now the findings, so on average, I think I might have said that 5 themes were being shown in the drawing, but that is an average. You know, there was clearly a variation around that. In fact, in the terms of range, there was one drawing which didn't show any themes. It was abstract, and from the child's description, we just still couldn't really work out what was in there. But that was just one child, and one child drew 12. You can imagine how long it took to score that drawing. So there's a huge range. But these are really interesting findings, because on the face of it, particularly as researchers, when you see, oh, it's not significant, oh, it's not significant, oh, it's not significant, you start crying. But I want to say this positively, or interpret it positively, is that although there was no difference in the number of themes that children were showing developmentally, it didn't matter what age they were showing a similar number of themes. And it didn't matter whether they were males or females, boys and girls produced a similar number of themes. And not just a number of themes, actually which themes, as I'll show on the next slide. And also whether the children had at least one parent that was a key worker. Again, there wasn't a difference in the total number of themes. Well, what does this mean? Well, hold on, I will tell you what that means, but I'm going to keep you waiting a little while longer. What about the number? What about which were the most common themes? Well, I've already sort of concentrated really explaining which ones were most common. So just make sure we're reading this table correctly. So there were 68 drawings, 68 children, 68 drawings, same thing. So this is the number, and we've shown you the percentages here. So I'm just going to concentrate on those first two columns to begin with. So what should hit you, this feelings and emotions is way out there as the most. This is what they're telling us. You know, this pandemic affected my emotions. That's the real take-home message. And then, of course, the next two themes, unsurprisingly, because emotions largely are shown through people, you've got person on their own and groups of people. So around 50% each for those. And then if I can just take nature and furniture and buildings, you know, you might sort of think, oh, that's not very interesting. Well, it is, because they were telling us what environments they were living in during the pandemic. You know, both inside with furniture and buildings, but also what they couldn't visit, because buildings were part of what they couldn't do. But also nature, because they were allowed out. You could go in the garden, you could go to the park, even though it might not have been the most social experience you've ever had, because there were restrictions. Nevertheless, you could do it. And then, of course, we've got the virus, the depiction of the virus itself. So this is what this theme is. So that was, you know, quite common. It may have been more common if it wasn't, perhaps, a possibility the younger children might not have known how to draw it. Possibly. And then we've got 40%, you know, prohibited, restricted behaviour, you know, as I say, what you couldn't do, or you could, but under restriction. And this is the masks, the hand sanitizer, keeping 2 meters distance. And then here, about a third of the drawings showed activities engaged during the pandemic. And notice there seems to be a threshold here. It really drops in percentage for the others. So we're really taking, you know, if you can follow my light, down to here are the real take-home messages of what the children are telling us. But I do want to point out death and loss, because this starred here because it actually was a statistically significant result, in the sense that those who, all 7 of those drawings which showed death and loss were made from children who had a key worker parent. Now, although it's significant, there's so few that it violated the test, so we're not making a big deal out of that. But just to indicate, perhaps it's suggestive that children who had a key worker, there might have been more of a narrative in their homes about death and loss. And that is showing in their drawings. If you're wondering what are these funny squidgy things, if you're not an academic, don't worry about it too much. It just means that these are the probability tests, and in science there is a convention that if a difference has a likelihood of occurring by chance more than 5%, we say, oh, it's too risky then to say that it's actually a genuine difference between the groups. It could have happened by chance. So that's why we're saying there weren't significant differences in the ages between any of these themes, or whether it's from the boys or girls, or whether they had a key worker parent or not. So these results, what you can take from them is that they are consistently true regardless of what age group the child came from, or age, and whether it was a boy or girl, or whether they had a parent who was a key worker or not. So let's go on to the interesting bit now. Well, I'm not suggesting what I've said so far is not interesting, but all yours is very interesting. Okay, going to get a swipe later. So let's have a look at some. So these are the 6 main themes. How am I doing for time? Okay. So feelings and emotions. So, you know, these were largely happy, sad, sometimes with tears, or angry and annoyed. But the second pair raters who actually scored the drawings, they had to say, they couldn't just say, face, expression face, they had to say what it was. Some of the labels they put down and noticed, they interpreted, oh, that looks like it's screaming, or shocked, frightened, frustrated, confused. And sometimes, as you can see here, the child actually wrote, just in case we couldn't pick it up. Very kind of the child. Some of them were, as you can see, were drawings that just did it on its own, solely, the expressions. Others would place a contextual situation or scene in which it was placed. So this particular child did write about her drawing. It is a picture of me at home throughout the lockdown, and the emojis show my feelings throughout this time. So they were changeable, and I think we all felt that, and children felt it as well. And some of, I think I've said before, some of the expressions were used as personification on some non-human, which we will see in a moment, I think. So let's move on to, and I've actually collated two themes together on this slide. So person with its own theme on their own, and groups of people. Now this is an amazing picture, I think. It feels very poignant to me. What we have is sort of a metaphorical expression of the straitjacket and put on a trolley. And indeed, the child's writing in their description, constricted, not being able to go outside. My picture shows how I felt during lockdown. And although we didn't analyse what we call formal or abstract properties, use of line, shape, colour, my personal view is that just the simple pencil drawing and the lack of colour really express the rawness of the child's feeling. In the middle picture, this is actually Boris, believe it or not, according to the child. It's Boris on the TV, and it really reminds us how many of us, religiously watched the BBC or whatever channel it was on, early evening government. In the first lockdown particularly, it was every day, I think. It was so poignant, and the child is expressing that. And then here, you've got groups of people which could be interpreted as understanding the rule of six. Remember the rule of six? Because it's complying with that. But it also shows the importance of allowing the child to talk about the drawing, to understand what is meant here. The child actually wrote simply, "I miss my friends." Because it could be more about not being able to see them. Okay, moving on. Now this is the virus itself. Now often it was depicted with a smiley face, but on a virus it starts to feel sinister. I feel. In the bottom drawing, I'll read that out for you. I think COVID is happy and he has stolen my smile. I mean, there's something sinister about that, isn't there? The top left picture, the child has chosen to take a more biological approach. That writing there says, the virus is a disease that infects your lungs. It makes you very ill and you have to isolate for 14 days in the house. So that's what they actually said. The child additionally wrote in the separate text box, coronavirus is mind-blowing and has changed my life. The top right picture is a scientist. We're doing our best we can. And there's a feeling here that, that although implied, it's about the vaccine. This is about the development of a vaccine. And interestingly, the child wrote, I want to be a scientist and find the cure. Perhaps the pandemic might have shaped some children's career aspirations towards the medical professions. It's an interesting thought. Right, well, this is a fun theme, prohibited and restricted behaviour. So in the top left you hear, like she's shouting, or with the question mark is, what is going on almost? I can't go to school, I can't see my friends, and I can't even see my family, presumably extended family. The middle picture particularly emphasises the issue with touch that we had in the pandemic. So this sort of no entry sign, if you remember, in March 2020, we were told, even before lockdown, don't shake people's hands. It was a really big thing at the time. No hugging. But even in some of these darker pictures, there was still light of positivity shown. In this second picture, I don't know whether you can see it, the child is saying to the mother, "I love you, Mum," and the mother's response, "I love you too." It's quite moving, some of these pictures. Now, you might not be able to see this one on the right. It's quite lightly drawn, but what this child has done is drawn a demarcation line of the bad things, which are all about prohibited, what they weren't able to do, but as well as the good things. So not seeing friends, not going on holiday, not hugging, again like that one, not going to preschool, and then if we weren't clear about what the child feels about that, then we got it there, haven't we? But then you've got more the good things. I'm actually making things at home. There's more home activities, reading books, video calls with grandma, dog walking. And so that made this child more happy. Now, this next slide is what we all had to do to protect ourselves from the virus. So I'm sure we all remember this mantra in the first lockdown: stay at home, save lives, protect the NHS. So that's coming really clear here, and you've got the mask here, but here are these devilish COVID cells knocking around. Here we've got loads of different ways in which we protected ourselves: mask, hand sanitizer, 2 metre distancing. Got the hand sanitizer here, but this is keeping at home. And there's something dark about that, literally in the colours, these shadowy figures in the house. And again, we got these COVID cells outside, and it's like in this one, it's almost like children are saying there's a conflict going on here. Outside there's danger, and we've got like a siege mentality of keeping in. It's almost warlike in a way. And then, anyway, we're going to brighten things up. So the activities engaged in the pandemic, so these are chirpier. And we did have these really positive pictures. Now, you'll thank me for not going to go through them all, because these are really busy pictures. But I hope you can see of all the fun things the children were able to do, because they were still, we can easily think, oh, well, there's so much we couldn't do, so much things that the children couldn't do, but there was a lot they could do. And in the left-hand drawing, the child wrote this: "My drawing is of all the things that COVID-19 has allowed me to experience. I've been at home, but Mummy has taught me. I've had Zoom dance lessons and piano lessons. Cubs has been online too. I played out in the garden on my trampoline in the paddling pool." Chance would be a fine thing. "I have washed my hands a lot," that's supposed to be good, "and made my own mask," and that's really impressive. "We have clapped for the nation," do you remember that? "And painted rainbows on my house windows. I've watched spring turn to summer and fed the birds in my garden. Played with my sister and brother, watched the space rocket go to the space station. Grown sunflowers and have homegrown strawberries." So, we did see these amazing positive pictures. But, in many of the pictures, it was a mixture. I mean, even in this very positive one, there's death in it, even though I think it says Nan's dog died. I'm not sure we could quite put that down to COVID. But there was still in the very positive figures, pictures of recognition of sadness. Now, here's another one, the final one I'm going to show you. And again, this is a boy, I think, in sort of solitary situation, playing games with his friends online, so that was interactive in that sense. But there he is in his room. And I'll read out what this is, because I think it'd be quite difficult. During quarantine, quarantine, this could well mean that he had COVID, has spent more time in my room playing video games like Fortnite, not familiar with it myself, with my mates. Usually I would be outside playing football all day with them. Now I can only talk to them through video games. Homework has been a heavy load for me, but I have found that I've done a lot more and become a lot more routine with it. Also, board games had become more popular in the house, and I spent more time with my brother and sister playing them. So again, in this description, we're seeing positive messages come through. You know, the child could still see his mates, albeit virtually. And there's a suggestion, at least for this child, that his day had become a bit more systematic, a bit more organized. And the increase of family time, at least for him, had been supportive of his sibling relationships. So to conclude, what do we make of all of this? Well, for a start, I mean, I have to say I didn't know quite what I was going to get from these drawings. They could have, you know, we asked them to reflect upon when the the pandemic came to the UK and how it's made them thought and feel, but they could have just decided to draw something else, but they didn't. So they knew what they were asked to do and were very happy to do it. And upload their pictures. They were all on task, so to speak. But of the drawings, they really represented a multitude of perspectives. So we are obviously naturally going to look at it from a psychological point of view. When we think about our psychology, we do think about, you know, our emotions, our relationships with other people, what we think and understand, how we behave, but also our biology. That is our psychology. Well, you saw all of that coming through the drawings. So we saw, as I've explained, how it affected people and their emotions. We saw how it affected people's relationships, whether they were isolated on their own, or whether they were in small groups, or whether they wished they could be, but they couldn't. Not being able to see friends. The drawings also demonstrated what they thought about it, but what surprised me, they were so knowledgeable about the restrictions and the personal protection behaviour. You know, these were children who were tuned in to what was going on. In terms of their behaviour, you know, they showed what they could do, they showed what they couldn't do, and even some described it from a biological perspective, as I read out from one of the descriptions about what the virus does to you and how it transmits. So in summary, the drawings provided a range and richness of children's perceptions of the pandemic, and they showed a mature understanding, I feel, of the pandemic, which has not only included their personal reflections, but their wider understanding of the societal issue that the pandemic had placed everybody in. And for me, it's a whole set of drawings. They communicated the often quoted phrases at the time, "We're all in this together." Now, finally, what do we make of the lack of significant results, which normally tears the heart out of a researcher? Well, what it clearly says is that they gave a consistent and reliable message, irrespective of how old they were, irrespective of whether they were boys or girls, and irrespective of whether their parents were key workers or not. So it was a consistent message. Those popular themes were popular throughout ages and across the gender. They spoke pictorially through a consistent and multi-perspective narrative. And in terms of, finally, if I can finish on a positive note from a research perspective, if I may, as Sarah said early on, there's just one UK study published at the moment. It's very small, but although we'd love to have a larger sample, it did, and we still got a decent number, which enabled far more themes to be expressed and for us to understand what those themes were than perhaps in the small-scale study that Sarah briefly referred to. So we hope, therefore, upon publication, to provide, our study will provide an important pictorial addition to how the pandemic has affected children in the UK. Thanks very much for listening. So Sarah's now going to come up here and she'll be answering all of your questions. Do you want the clicker? Because she might ask to go to different slides. Come on.
I'm afraid, Richard, you're not getting away.
All right.
Claudia is organising the questions.
Right, okay. Do as you're told.
Thank you very much both for this very interesting talk. Questions? We've got one lady over there. The mic is coming.
Thank you. In terms of the demographic of children selected, I'm not sure how much focus was given on socio-economic status. And I think it would be really interesting to see the different perspectives from, children that in Stoke, a lot of children are living below the poverty line. Just that one drawing where people were saying online, ballet, Zoom, this, that and the other. The majority of children I know live in a terraced house with no backyard. They couldn't go in a paddling pool. There's no green spaces. So I think it would be really interesting learning perspective to see the difference between different social groups, really.
I think that's a really valid point. And we didn't directly collect data about socioeconomic status. We did ask them a little bit about the location they lived in terms of whether it was urban or whether it was more rural. And we had a whole variety of locations there, but again, nothing that we were able to kind of analyse to find any particular differences. But I think the point that you make is really, really valid. And I think it is really different. And I think this is maybe one of the limitations sometimes of this method of recruiting participants, that maybe our sample will have been slightly biased towards the more affluent families with more technology, internet access, although that isn't always something that's different in these situations. But I think that sometimes that wanting to take part in research can be something that can be related to parent education level, which can be related to socioeconomic status, of course, not always. But I think probably our sample was slightly biased towards the more affluent anyway. But I think the point you make is a really important one.
I mean, the difficulty with actually getting a sample is it had to be self-selecting. We advertised the study, but we got what we got. It wasn't possible to think, well, we're going to go into, SES level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and get an equal sample. We weren't in that fortuitous situation. We'd have loved to, got a bigger sample with a cross-section. And we did ask additional questions, which we haven't actually really talked about, but one was perhaps to do, where they were living. It was done by volunteers, and by that very nature, you might not get a representative sample of anything, really. It's just part of the nature of research of this nature, anyway.
Thank you. So we have gentlemen in the first row, and then we're going to go here.
Well, we did well there, didn't we?
Two for the price of one.
Hi. Why only one picture?
I guess there's, I suppose, an implicit message from that is you think they might have been able to say more if they'd been asked to do more. Is that where you're thinking?
Well, you seem to have got a kind of reiteration of what's been shown to them. Like TV programmes.
Yeah, they're very aware, aren't they, children, of those images? And I suppose that just makes me think a bit tangentially about some other research that we've been involved in. We've looked at where do children get their ideas about what to draw? And of course, what children see influences what they draw. And there are some research studies out there where they do ask children to draw multiple pictures in a sort of approach of trying to find out everything that the child knows about a particular topic. And I think we had a much sort of broader, open, we didn't necessarily want to know everything about all their experiences. we wanted to know what they felt was the most important things. And we did give some guidelines about, giving children a range of coloured pencils and things like that to do with their drawings, but we really wanted these children to have the freedom to draw kind of as much or as little as they wanted. So I think, again, really, we could have asked for multiple drawings. It would have given us more to analyse, but I'm not sure that it would have really addressed our research question in any greater depth. We wanted to know what children's experiences were, and I think we got a fairly fairly good overview that certainly went beyond what has come out of some of the
I think it's the difference between what we sort of do. We're analysing a research question and not children, in a sense.
Yeah.
So we design studies in which we collect a sample of data, and hopefully that whole data set, in our case 68 drawings, answers our research question, what are the most common themes. But there is another approach, perhaps a more child-focused approach, in which you would spend time with individual children and getting them to do multiple drawings and explore more about their individual. But bear in mind, we couldn't see the children. We had no access to children. The regulations at the time, these are all done at home. And I think if we'd have asked the parents, can you do 3 or 4 drawings, I think we probably wouldn't have got, we'd have got fewer drawings in the end, because it would have been too much of a burden.
Thank you. So we will have a question here, the lady, and then here.
I just wondered if you had noticed a difference in the concerns of children with the pandemic drawings and other drawings that you collected at a different time, and whether there's any analysis you can do between them, or whether they just don't really correlate.
I think it's a really interesting question. I suppose it's that, what would we compare them with, sort of thing. So we've been involved in various research projects where we've asked children to draw happy pictures, sad pictures, and I suppose those are sort of some of those expression of emotion projects come to mind. And there are definitely some similarities there, that we can very much see that children can express a range of emotions through their drawings. I don't know, I feel that there's something maybe that generally when we ask children to draw, we see more depictions that are expressing that happy emotion, and children are generally a little bit better practiced at expressing that happy emotion. Whereas what we see here is many drawings in which there was that mixture of emotion, those sort of 3 emoticon faces, the happy, the sad, the angry. That was something that really struck me when I first looked at this sample of drawings, was how many drawings there were that I could really identify with how I felt during those periods of lockdown. The highs, the lows, the frustration. But we did also see maybe more drawings that were that sadness, that anxiety, than maybe we wouldn't see in other projects.
I mean, we've done studies, Sarah alluded to it, where we've just simply asked children, draw a happy picture, draw a sad picture, draw an angry picture. What you tend to get, the very youngest children, they'll just show faces of those. As you get older, through the elderly later primary school, they tend to draw a scene or a narrative that explains why someone would feel happy, sad, angry. So happy, you tend to have birthday parties, holidays, or fun things they enjoy doing. Sadness, as you would get, perhaps graveyard scenes or death and bereavement, or falling out with a friend. Angry would tend to be something like road rage, or it might be metaphorically done through the weather, like a storm, or angry at pollution, particularly for the older children. So that is what you typically get. I mean, it'd be lovely to have known the pandemic was coming, and to, in January 2020, done the study of, just think about your lives now. How do you think and feel about it? Draw it for us. But we wouldn't have seen any of these I mean, it was really, they were really nailed on, a lot of the drawings. Every single drawing, you wouldn't have, if you'd have not known there was a pandemic, you'd have looked at it and think, what's going on here? We didn't see drawing. I mean, you wouldn't, would you? We didn't know. I mean, what would you think of before the pandemic? that would have made a child to draw any of these sorts of drawings. They really were, in a sense, very different, but in the same way, similar, and they drew their emotions. Children will draw what is of interest to them. So yes, we shape them in a sense. Can you draw about how you think about the pandemic rather than just any drawing? But they drew what was important to them. But I think one point we want to make is that there were similarities between what child A, B, C, D, E, F drew in terms of the most common themes.
Thank you.
When investigating the aim of your study, what could you do differently to improve the significance of your results?
I mean, one answer there from a very statistical perspective is we could have collected more drawings.
And boy, did we try.
We really did try. Statistically, the bigger the sample size, the more likely you are to find significant differences. So we did look at the size of the effects that we found. So although the differences were non-significant, we could look at, well, what is the amount of difference between the key worker children, the non-key worker children? And generally what we found there are very small effect sizes. Now, in statistics, if we'd had about 400, 450 participants, those very small differences would actually have been statistically significant.
So you could say then, okay, there are genuine differences between the age groups or genuine differences, but you're still left with a small difference.
Yes, so there were small differences between the groups, but they were, we could either say, they're not large enough to be of real interest to us because they are such small differences, or we could take that view that, well, if we had had a much larger sample size, they would have been statistically different, even though that might not necessarily mean they're any more meaningfully different than they are. Sorry, rather statistical-based answer. Maybe there's a better one Richard can give.
Well, apart from that, it would have been great to have a crystal ball that in January we knew it was coming. We'd put the thing through ethics. They wouldn't have known what to deal with it because what you're talking about. But if they'd have gone along with it, and then we'd have had the study set up on March the 23rd when Boris locked us all down and the children would start drawing. Because I do think, because it takes time to set up a study. You've got to think it through and going through ethics. You've got to be... treat your participants with respect. That by June, I think, and you're a mother, I'm not, but you'll know, I think, in the first few months, probably parents were open to think, oh, I don't know what to do with my children. And then, am I right in saying that once it got to a few months, they said, oh, don't give me anything more to do. I'm tired of it.
Balancing enough here, thank you very much.
So I think, but I don't know if it's anecdotal, but maybe by the time June came, that perhaps we didn't get as many as we would have done if we'd managed to start the study early. So I have a regret about that, but I don't know what I'd have done about it. That's all I can say.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and then I'm afraid we will have to finish.
Hello there.
Hi.
I want to know why you drew the line at 14. Why? And the other thing is, have you thought about going back to those children and getting them to redraw their perception of those years and compare that, obviously, with their initial drawings? Because I suppose that what we don't know is the longer lasting effect of all this and how long it'll take for it to go through the system.
So really, really good questions again. I think the reason that we drew the line at 14 is a little bit related to the UK education system and the fact that from 14 children choose their GCSE subjects, and so you then kind of get this perception among children that, oh, I draw, I don't draw. And I think our research question was really about trying to find out about children's experiences rather than just those children who saw themselves as drawers or artists. I completely recognise it is a little bit arbitrary and that lots of factors influence whether a child decides to take GCSE art and design or not. From our own research with children, sometimes it's the timetable that's the influencing factor and things like this. But I think that was one of our reasons, is that we really wanted to look at this period of time when children generally, regularly engage in drawing. We felt that with older children, maybe other methodologies might be more appropriate compared to drawing. So that was kind of our rationale, I think, for why 14. Again, it's that crystal ball, I suppose, in that ethics. This study was really about children's experiences at that point in time, rather than necessarily the later impacts of the research. So yes, it could be interesting to follow up these children, but we didn't at the time seek ethical approval for that. And that ethics process is very much also looking at our particular research question, which was about their experiences at that time, and making sure that the methods that we were using answered that research question, maybe rather than the slightly different one about the follow-ups. But it would be really interesting, actually, even now, to go and collect data from children about their recollections of that time. You know, what are the memories that have stayed with them? So that would definitely be interesting.
I think, we certainly did talk about it, didn't we, potentially doing a follow-up study. But I honestly think if it had been a follow-up quite soon after the pandemic was easing, and of course it wasn't clear when it was easing, and then it got worse, and it was easing, and then it got worse, because we had 3 lockdowns. So when are we out of it? I certainly felt, I can't speak for Sarah and the other, but I thought, well, if we asked them, you know, can you make drawings about how you felt in the past tense about the pandemic, I don't think we'd have got anything different than we've got now. But I do understand what the drive of your question is, and I do think it would be interesting, perhaps given a little bit more time, I think, gap, but perhaps soon, is to get them perhaps to do more of a reflective drawing, self-reflection of back in time when they felt their lives have been back to normal for some time. I think that would be interesting, because I think we might get something different then about what their sort of reflections, past reflections of that period was. So that would be interesting to do. But also sometimes practically as researchers, we've got to get things published. It'd be great, we have ideas, think, wouldn't it be good to have that follow-up, but then it would take 10 years to get the whole thing out. You know, so sometimes we're driven by our job demands.
Research with children's drawings is amazing and really fulfilling, but it is very time-consuming. The process of analysing the drawings is much more time-consuming than the process of analysing text or you know, getting children to fill in questionnaires. And indeed, you know, the bulk of the research that's coming out about children's experience or the impact of the pandemic on children is that more sort of questionnaire-based research, because it's quicker, it's easier.
Yeah, I mean, it took over a year to analyse the drawings, because we have believe it or not, we have other things to do. I don't know if there's any other academics here, but we do have other things to do. But I mean, you know, it's painstaking listing every single item of content. I mean, you do see some drawings, studies in the literature say they use content analysis, and then you read it and you think, yeah, really? If I don't want to be too disparaging, but I mean, they have a very light touch.
We analysed every detail that the children drew in their pictures. Some other studies in this area have basically categorised the whole drawing as one thing or another thing. So this drawing shows understanding of the virus, this drawing shows this, whereas we took a much...
Because each drawing is showing a number of understandings, it's not just showing one. And we wanted to, I mean, we wanted the child's pictorial voice to be fully said, not just to say, just to summarise it, okay, you're saying that then. Because as if a child is saying, well, I am saying that, but I'm saying a lot of other things, but you're ignoring that. But it takes time to be able to do that, and a lot of perseverance. And it's just not as easy to score drawings, because they're messy literally they're messy, but they're messy scientifically, because you think, oh, you could go that way with that, you could go that way, what does that mean, which theme should that go in? Yeah, but it's saying something about that. And you know, the times I had discussions with the raters, I mean, I had a full head of hair 2 years ago, and I was 28, and but it's really hard if you try and do it properly. I don't want to be sort of pious properly, because there's different good ways of doing it properly, but if you try and do scientific rigour to analysing children's drawings in this way, it really takes time. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you. Round of applause for our speakers.
Thank you very much for listening and being so attentive.
Our next event is on the 15th of May, and it is an inaugural lecture by Professor Matt Slater, and it's about better leadership. So if you are signed up to our email list, we will definitely send you an invitation. If you would like to be signed up to our email list, please let us know. This talk, as our other Catalyst Collaborations talks, will be available on demand on YouTube. So if you think some of your colleagues might be interested, please do share a link, and we can send that link in our follow-up information. And our next Catalyst Collaborations is back in October. Thank you very much. Have a safe journey home.
Thank you.